Today's guest stands as a formative figure in the indie RPG genre. From their 2010 breakout, Breath of Death VII, to 2017's kickstarted Chrono-like Cosmic Star Heroine, to today. This man launched his own independent studio, taking us back to where it all started, with the brilliant remake Breath of Death VII, The Beginning, Reanimated. Please welcome Bill Stiernnberg, aka Shadow Layer Games. How's it going today?
Hi, it's going good. How are you?
Yeah, doing well. It's pretty early for me, but I am managing, and yeah. So, basic question. Breath of Death was the very first game you shipped. What led you to fully remake it 14 years later?
Yeah. So it started with this idea I had, where I was kind of looking at some of the old art I'd done and some of the like new stuff I've done and comparing it and seeing like, wow, I've made some progress, like with just general artwork, just drawing characters and things, which I do to kind of improve on my art skill. And I also thought it would be kind of neat if I took like a really old sprite that I made, like an old game sprite. And obviously one of the oldest ones that I've done, at least in a shipped game, is the Breath of Death 7 sprites. And Dim, he's a difficult character because he's a skeleton. Right. And skeletons have a lot of detail, all these bones. And so the original sprite is very basic, and it looks kind of funny because, you know, how do you draw ribs and legs and armor on a skeleton? So I thought it would be fun to do it in like my current style after I've done, you know, Cthulhu Saves the World, The Penny Arcade, Cosmic Star Heroine, you know, Madness Lies, all this other stuff since then, and just to see how it would look. And, you know, I drew it and put in this detail and stuff, and I'm like, man, that's kind of neat to compare it. I wonder what it would look like, you know, if I did a run cycle, like instead of the 2-frame cycle from the original. Mm-hmm. So I made this run cycle. It was really neat, and I thought, you know, it'd be really cool if you could move it around. So I hadn't touched programming since, like, before Breath of Death. I actually did, like, a fan game remake of an old adventure, of the old adventure game for Atari before doing Breath of Death. But hadn't touched coding since then, and I thought, okay, I'm just gonna mess with this for a few minutes. It was like on a Sunday afternoon. I had some time. I'm like, okay, I'll program this so I can see my little sprite move around the screen. Mm-hmm. So you can see where this is going. Eventually it snowballed, and I'm like, wow. Oh, and another character. Oh, I'll make them talk. I'll do some dialogue. I'll see if I can get them in a map. And eventually I was like, hey, this could be like a cool thing to do. So I just sort of did it as like a passion project, like a fun thing, and I was learning, and you know, I was getting back into coding. I was learning new ways to tie in art with the code, and it was just really compelling. Like I was feeling just really energized by it, and you know, eventually I finished it. And
wow,
yeah, and that's the genesis of this remake. And like I said, it was a huge amount of fun, and it was kind of a passion project.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I can tell. I mean, for it to start from just one sprite to exploding into an entire project, that's definitely evident of your passion. Like, how long did this take you?
Yeah, so like I said, it was sort of a hobby thing. Like I think to me, at least, especially at first, I was doing it just because I thought it would be neat. And then I started learning, and it started getting like I was compelled because it was interesting. You know, you start learning about something, any new hobby or a craft or skill, and it pulls you in. And but I kept it to spare time, and there were, you know, great lengths of time where I didn't even touch it because I was focused on the actual games we were doing at Zeboyd. Right. So I think this started like, man, ages ago, maybe like 5 or 6 years ago. It started quite a while ago. But again, it was kind of like, oh, it would be really cool if I could make my sprite do X, Y, Z, and, you know, code that and see if it worked. And then, and then I would put it off to make our games that we released, and maybe I'd have a Sunday afternoon I could fiddle with it. So it took a long time, but I don't think the overall time, the number of years, is representative, you know, of how much time, like man hours, was put into it, since it was spread out like that.
Right. Yeah, I hear you. Wow. So just like your spare Sunday afternoons for years and years and years, learning to program, you know, is it your own engine?
And I will say, so I programmed it, right? But it's built in Fusion 2.5. I think it's Click Fusion now, or Multimedia Fusion back when I started. But and that's just because that's one I did, as a hobby back before Zvoid existed. But there's a million options for people to learn game engines now. Or I guess if you're technically inclined, you could write your own engine from scratch. But
Right.
obviously, there's Game Maker, there's Unity, which people are turning away from. There's, how do you pronounce this? Is it Godot? Godot.
Yeah, yeah, it's Godot. Yeah, for a long time I was calling it Godot, but that's like a faux pas. Yeah, gosh, what a fascinating story. Gosh, I would have never thought that it was just sort of a passion project that took you years and years until eventually it finished. Wow, that is fascinating stuff. So, what do you think longtime fans are going to be most excited about in this new release?
Yeah. So I think the big thing, if you played the original, or back in the day, or played it recently, the thing that's going to stick out the most, that's going to be the most fun, is just seeing how the new presentation is, right? So the new sprites and environments, they're all based on the original. Even the layouts of the user interface is all based on the original. So you could, play the two games the same way, and you'll notice, like, oh, where I, go in this one, it's very similar to this one, but you're still kind of like seeing this totally new, reimagined environment, and seeing all these highly detailed sprites that are a lot more expressive now. And I think that's going to be the big thing. The music is all entirely new as well. Hyperduck Soundworks, they're super awesome, and they did the sound for this. Whereas the original, it was a handful of music tracks that we licensed on a per song basis, and we did our best at the time to make sure they sort of sounded cohesive. But there's only so much you can do when you're getting a battle theme that's licensed from here and like a town theme from there. So having a cohesive soundtrack makes a big difference, a positive difference. And then there's also a lot of other little things, like I streamline certain things, like especially in the shops. You don't have to separately pull up menus to compare items. It just shows you things like that. You can buy and equip immediately. In the battle system, there's little icons for when an enemy is poisoned, stuff like that. So it's a lot easier just to play. I smoothed over some of the rough spots. I think the big thing is, whoa, it's the same, but it looks so cool and it sounds awesome and it plays well. And then, it's a much more streamlined experience as well.
Right. Yeah, yeah, those little details like equipping from the shop screen, or just, you know, saving those extra clicks really go a long way. And I'm sure, the art is really going to catch people's eye as well. The maps, you can tell so much care. It's it's a labor of love just going into the shop and seeing the little animation the guy does, and man, yeah, that is just so impressive to me. So yeah, people are going to be really excited. So that brings us to my next question. There's often an expectation for remakes to be somehow definitive, right? How do you want Breath of Death 7, the beginning Reanimated, to be remembered?
I think the thing to remember about stuff like this Breath of Death version that I did, is that I think most remakes, if you define it that way, where a game has been rebuilt from the ground up, but it tries to keep the core gameplay, story, characters the same, true to the original. I think something to keep in mind is that usually I wouldn't say that it replaces the original. I think a remaster, where they take a game pretty much as is and make it have better performance, higher resolution, clean up sound or audio compression or video compression artifacts, clean up texture work, stuff like that. I would consider that a remaster. And I think in those situations, you could say, this is definitive. This makes the old version kind of obsolete. With a remake where you have totally overhauled, kind of everything, but it's true to the original gameplay, I think the two can kind of coexist. So I want to say that I put a lot into it, and I think that if you're going to choose one, I think you should choose the reanimated version, the remake, because it looks better, it sounds better, it's a little smoother to play. There's Steam achievements and stuff like that, quality of life improvements. But I think the original kind of has this charm to it. It's kind of blocky and simple in its presentation. But I don't know. I think there's some charm to that, and I think some people, might enjoy like this romp through this 8-bit looking version of it too. So, that's my opinion. I think they're both cool. They're both. You don't have to say, oh, this one makes the other one obsolete. But I do, in my own like biased opinion, think my new version is like a better experience.
Right on. Yeah, so there's space for them to both coexist, you say. Yeah, the first one is a classic to many people. So why invalidate that? Why say, oh, you got to play this and enjoy this more? I like I like that approach. That's a good philosophy. On that topic, with remakes, they make up a large portion of the gaming zeitgeist today. Huge examples: Resident Evil 2, Final Fantasy VII, and Persona 3 Reload. What are your thoughts on the current remake trend in the gaming industry?
Yeah, it's a really big trend. Like you named some big ones, but like I mean, you could just keep going. Like there's the Dead Space remake, which competed with um, one of the other horror ones. There's a Silent Hill remake that came out semi
Yeah.
recently. Uh, and then there's like smaller remakes, and like Shadow of the Ninja. If anyone played the NES version, there's a remake of that. And then you've got all these remasters just coming in. Like the Tomb Raider series got remastered semi recently. The Quake 1 and 2. Okay, so there's a million of them, and there's this broad range, right, of games that are sort of enhanced ports or remasters, which I would put like the Night Dive Studio stuff, where they've taken the original assets and maybe they've ported the engine or taken the original code and made it work within their new engine so they can enhance it. So they're taking the exact experience of the original and cleaning it up, enhancing performance, visuals, maybe smoothing over some of the things that are difficult to see or do in the game. You also have this debate, right, where some people say, well, I wish these publishers, the big ones like Capcom, Square Enix, and so on, would spend that money and resources making a brand new game instead of just, revisiting or rehashing their old games. And I understand that, but I think in a lot of these cases, they're not putting their big AAA teams, their cutting edge teams, their top developers and designers on these remakes and remasters. A lot of times it's like Night Dive, where they'll contract with a studio to do it and produce awesome results. And then you have teams like Capcom, where if they're going to go in and do a remake, they're going to make it a big deal. Like they're not going to just throw it together. They're going to try and make it so it feels fresh and new, and it justifies its existence regardless of the original. I think that Resident Evil 2 does that. Mm-hmm. So I don't think it's really just taking away from these publishers who would otherwise do great new IPs. I think they're already in a situation where they're conservative with their budgets and their risk taking. And if anything, hopefully, like some of this stuff, like let's say they remaster some older game and it sells really well. Well, maybe they'll see that as a reason to do a new game in that series or innovate in the way that one did.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that these games are an opportunity to bring older like video gamey things, to a modern audience, right? Because I think in recent years there's been a push to sort of make things more cinematic or naturalistic, right? And we lose some of that that all important pastiche. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The sort of interconnected level design in Resident Evil 2 perhaps fell by the wayside in recent years, right? And now people get to enjoy that beautiful mechanic. So yeah. So that brings me to a few questions about your early history. So you are clearly inspired by classic NES, SNES, and Sega CD JRPGs. That gets me thinking, how did you get started with video games? What was your first?
The first video game I think I ever played was Pac-Man. Pretty sure. If I go reach back into my mind, vague memories of playing Pac-Man at a restaurant with my dad or something like that, giving me a quarter to put in the arcade machine and play it. And like figuring out that like, holy crap, you can control the character with the analog stick. And it was really simple and really easy to get into. After that, eventually my family bought a, NES, a Nintendo Entertainment System. And of course, with the pack-in with Super Mario Brothers and Duck Hunt. And I mean, it's, it's all history from there, right? Like, now you have a console at home, you learn the controls. I literally remember, like, okay, how do I do this? I push this D-pad this way and looking up and seeing Mario move, right? And jumping. It was not immediately intuitive. You don't just pick it up and know how to play Super Mario Brothers. Of course, I was a little kid.
Wow. Yeah.
And it was just magic, like, back then. It's hard to say how kids these days feel with technology like that all around us. Smartphones, computers, like touchscreens everywhere, smart TVs. At school, they have smart, like, projectors, So I don't know if there's that same kind of magic of like, holy crap, I can use this controller and control something on screen in this like virtual little game world. So, I mean, I was pretty much hooked at that point. Like later on, I would get into modding games and stuff because I realized, like, especially when 3D started becoming a thing with Doom, like, I got Doom because I thought, wow, this is the closest thing to virtual reality. Like, even before that was really a thing. I was like, being in a game in first person and being able to explore. That was my first real experience with it outside of, like, Microsoft Flight Simulator, which was super simplistic at the time.
Right, it's this other world. Yeah.
Yeah. It felt like you're in a world now. Super Mario Brothers, games like that, and Sonic the Hedgehog, or fighting games, or whatever, games I loved, Super Mario Kart, Legend of Zelda, you're playing a game, and there's a game world, but you're controlling a character in it. Whereas at the time when I first played, Doom, and I know there were other first-person games before this, but Doom was the first one I played where I was like, okay, I'm like in the game world now. I can look around, I can explore it and see it. And that really drove me to learn how to, like, to do mods for it and stuff, which kind of got me into the game development side because now I wanted to, like, make things in it. And so I started creating simple graphical changes. And the big thing, of course, was making levels. And that got me into, making levels for that game, making simple mods for weapons and items. And I mean, that kind of took off from there. Modding games became more popular after Doom, and so I just started doing it. Started getting to learning how to make games from that point.
So you started modding Doom. That's how you got your start in game development.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I mean, I can't think of anything before that. I would used to, like, something I used to do for fun. I think a lot of kids that grew up with the NES did this. So I used to draw maps for games that were not very intuitive or were purposefully like a maze. So the easy example is Metroid, or even Metroid 2 for the Game Boy. Like, you get out your grid paper and you start drawing where the screens are and mapping it out.
Yeah, me too. I did that too with the grid paper, yeah.
It was, like, I think, a fairly common thing. It was fun. Like, today people think, oh, without a map for a Metroid-style game, like, oh, I'm lost, it's crazy. But that back then, of course, there was no map that you pull up, and it was like, oh, I'm going to draw this out and figure out where to go. And that was part of the fun. And you could show your friends your map and be like, look, this is how you can get X, Y, Z. And a lot of the fun was part of that. A lot of it, like Legend of Zelda, it was really big to talk about, like, how to get places and items you could find. So, big getting into, like, seeing the game world and mapping it out, I think, was kind of a part of it, because it's like I was almost reverse engineering, like, the game design of the maps, right? Because you're playing it and you're mapping it out, and now you're understanding, like, oh, okay, so I went here to get the ice beam, and now I go back and I can use the ice beam on this enemy, and suddenly I can climb up to this platform and explore this new part of the world. And it became fun to sort of figure that out. But yeah, like, I think once I got a hold of a game that let me make stuff for it, like Doom, that's where it really kicked off.
Right. Gosh, that's so fascinating. The idea of like the process of playing a game being so involved that you almost need to understand how it works, how it's designed. You know, you are literally like, I don't know, transcribing the game onto grid paper, and then how that it transitions to your Doom mods. Do you remember like some of the Doom mods that you worked on?
Well, so I think every kid who messed with Doom or Doom level editing always made their house. That was the thing. Like everyone's like, I need to learn how to do this, or I want to make this. I'm going to make my house, and like it's right around me. It's easy to see, and like you build
Yeah.
it, and you build all the rooms, and it's like, hey, I made my house in Doom. That was fun, but kind of pointless.
Uh-huh.
So it was weird because I started trying to build other things in Doom, like from other games. And around that same time, things like the Star Wars, was it Dark Forces? Was whatever the first person shooter Star Wars game was. And then around a little bit later, Duke Nukem 3D, and then Quake started coming out. So I fairly quickly moved over to making mods for Duke Nukem 3D because it was a lot easier actually. The tools were for modding were shipped with Duke Nukem 3D, so you didn't have to download a third party map editing tool. It came with it, and the art editing tools for importing art. So I got really into that, and the cool thing about it was I would try to build other games within Duke Nukem 3D. So like, I would try to build Quake. Like I rebuilt Quake 2's entire first level in Duke Nukem 3D because
Wow.
I thought it would be fun to see how that would work. And adding stuff from like Star Fox and just weird things like that. So being able to like put things in from like there's all these little silly mods that you would make. You would make, weapons from Turok, and I would edit the code files and then make the artwork and put in um, the particle accelerator from Turok and put it into Duke Nukem 3D and have the enemies explode.
Wow.
So it's a lot of silly stuff, a lot of multiplayer maps. I play with my younger brother, that kind of thing. But not, it was back then I was, in middle school, high school, so it wasn't like a huge deal. It was
Yeah.
just a fun hobby.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I hear you. Gosh, that's so cool. Like I'm catching a trend of reverse engineering and all this. You know, from the early NES games, to Doom and like literally remaking things from other games, bringing them into Duke Nukem or Doom, and that's so fascinating. Thank you for sharing that story and everything. Um, so do these experiences still inspire you today? That's what I'm getting at is
Oh yeah, for sure. Like it's it's still a whole it still feels like I'm constantly learning. So it's hard to describe unless you're this kind of person, which I think most people have it a little bit, where you find something that when you're doing it and you learn just a little bit more, you want to keep pushing to see how far you can go with it. You just, and not out of any kind of competitive thing or any kind of like, you know, um, it's not like a discipline thing. It's just, wow, I did that. Well, like, okay, if can I do this next thing, and just keeping building on that knowledge and experience. It's just there's this certain amount of this rewarding feeling, and it just compels you to keep going and keep learning and keep seeing what you can do. And a lot of times you don't even notice what more you can do until you look back what you did before, and you're like, wow, I mean, I knew I was improving or advancing, but I didn't really notice until I compared it to the thing I did 1 year ago, 5 years ago.
mhm.
And I want to say that, like, my younger experiences, it's a very similar feeling. But a big part of what I think like compels me to keeps me in this and keeps me going today is just all the people. It's really like literally like meeting all the people that do this too, like in this game development like industry, as well as people that are like fans and stuff, but seeing other people do it and like talking shop. I know that some people think like, oh, why would you work and then talk to people about work? But like when I talk to game developers, especially when I talk to them in person, which it's a little more personal when you're in person at expos and stuff, there's a it's just really invigorating to talk to other people about the stuff you do, and they're also passionate about it. And there's no barrier of explaining it. Like, I explain it to friends who are not in this game industry, and there's going to be a barrier to, what is a game engine, or like, what do you mean when you say you log into the Steam developer portal? What is that? Like, you can talk about a lot of the stuff with other developers, and just, you can just carry the conversation and go into things in depth without having to worry about, does this person understand, or do they think this topic is boring? Like, and meeting people and just appreciating that I'm here doing this now. A lot of it is because of the people that I've met and the communities I was a part of along the way. Like, it's hard to really understand and hard to understate how important that I feel that's been. When we started doing this commercially, when I started doing this commercially, it was on Xbox Live Indie Games, which was literally a community. Like, you make your game and submit it to other community members, and you review these games before they get released for technical, things and stuff like that. And then just keeping up with them, meeting other people in the industry. We ended up getting to know the Penny Arcade people, stuff like that. It's all just like, that's a big part of what keeps me going, is just how cool and how much fun it is to do this and to be in this industry, knowing these people. And I always will remember how fortunate I am to be in the places I've been at the times I have, because like, a lot of those people I've met are the reason I'm here doing this now. And it's just very fortunate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I see what you're saying. So, less so the early experiences and more the people that have uplifted you along the way, right? Wow, that's so cool. How did you get involved with Penny Arcade?
Okay, so this is kind of neat. um, we, I think a lot of developers that succeed, not all the time, but a lot of time, it's about being at the right place at the right time. So for us, we started making games on Xbox Live Indie Games, which is like a subset of Xbox Live Arcade. If someone's not familiar with it, it's like it's a system where developers pay a small fee to become community creators. You develop with Microsoft's tools, which were provided as long as, for free, and then you had your small fee to be on this platform. And then when you're ready to submit to sell it on the service, other developers in that community who had paid their fee and were part of the forums had to review it. And they review it for, does the controller work, or does it corrupt your save file, or if you're using a Guitar Hero controller and press, strum, does it do X, Y, Z? And if enough other developers give it a pass, then it's free to launch on the service.
Mm-hmm.
We'd done that, and that's how we got involved in the community. And we had launched Breath of Death 7 and Cthulhu Saves the World. At the same time we were doing that, we were also, when I say we, I mean me and Robert Boyd, we were doing Z-Boyd Games, just starting out. And we were also involved a lot on the Penny Arcade web forums, the Games and Technology web forum.
Okay.
And that's actually how we knew each other. I had done this little adventure Atari remake for free fan game. At the same time, Robert was doing these sort of choose your own adventure style games that he launched on Xbox Live Indie Games. And we decided, hey, well, why don't we work together? It'll be fun to make like a bigger game that either of us could make on our own and launch it on the Xbox 360 with Xbox Live Indie Games. We're like, man, this is awesome. You can be like a 1 or 2 man team and pay a small fee, and suddenly you can develop for and release Xbox games. That's awesome. So yeah, we started doing it. And we've been on the Penny Arcade forums for ages. Cthulhu Saves the World comes out. We actually were lucky. Again, right place and time. Steam was Valve with Steam, they hadn't opened up the gates to everybody at that time. It was still closed off. Still kind of a apply to them and hopefully they say yes to let your game on situation.
Right.
And we were fortunate. We got in touch with them and they agreed to get our games on Steam. And all around the same time, someone on the Penny Arcade forums who was a fan of the Penny Arcade games, which are the Rain Slick series,
Mm-hmm.
they were uh, they were, disappointed that the series had been canceled after Rainslick 2, and they created a thread in those subforums saying, it's unfortunate that Rainslick series had to end, and Jerry Holkins, the writer, who, he's been trying to write out the story in text form. Couldn't a small studio just do some really basic, like 8-bit style game and continue the series in game form? This seems like something Jerry would be fine with. And I think someone else may have mentioned our little tiny studio since we were involved in the forums. And I think Robert, responded and was like, yeah, I mean, that would be awesome if that ever happened. But like, there's a 0% chance Penny Arcade will approach us about making another Penny Arcade Rainslick game. But if they ever did, yeah, we'd be totally behind it. That was it. And we were like, okay. And shortly after that post, Penny Arcade's business, the head of their business, which his name was Robert Koo. I don't think he works there anymore. But he actually approached us after that post and said, hey, we should talk. Like, maybe we can actually do something like this. And long story short, like, that's how it started. They'd seen our games, our simple games that didn't take that long to make. Breath of Death, Cthulhu Saves the World, which has a humor element, like, the Penny Arcade comics are obviously comedy. There's an eldritch Lovecraftian element to the Cthulhu Saves the World, which was also an element of the Penny Arcade games, the Rainslick series. So it was kind of a very fortunate match where we're an active part of their community. We make kind of games that kind of fit their themes, and they figured, well, yeah, like it would be cool to finish the story in game form. So they got in touch with us, and we're like trying to conceal our excitement. We're like, yes, we would very much like to work on the Penny Arcade games, but inside we're like, yeah, super at it. So that's how it started, and from there, yeah, definitely took off. It was a very just a really awesome experience from that point.
Right. Okay. So, you were on the forums at the right time. You were already sort of teaming up with Robert Boyd, and here's Penny Arcade looking for a new studio to develop potentially a sequel. What happened with On the Rainslick Precipice of Darkness episodes 1 and 2 to open the door for you guys?
Well, we don't know all the details about that, but I think what you can tell just from basically public knowledge is that whatever their internal reasons are, they had to cancel the series after the first two.
Mm-hmm.
And at first, it became a situation where Penny Arcade, so Jerry Holkins, it's sort of his passion project, was going to finish the story, not to leave it hanging on a cliff, by writing it out in text and posting it on their website. And he started doing that. I think he wrote the entire story for the third game for Rainslick 3 and had posted it by the time they contacted us. So
Mm-hmm.
I think it boiled down to basically allowing Jerry, like, for his like passion project for Penny Arcade, how can he like have the reins to have that executed? How can the Penny Arcade company allow that to be executed without it taking just a whole lot of their time and resources away from their main Penny Arcade projects?
Right.
Which include everything from their comic to their charity to their expos and all of their other like licensing stuff they did. So
right.
I think they wanted to be able to finish it. Jerry wanted to finish it as a game. This seemed like a way to do it, and it seemed like a way to do it within reason, like within time, within whatever the budget may have been, and within a reasonable scope.
Mm-hmm.
So I think again it was like very fortunate timing for us and being in the right place.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I like that. And I guess, that certain amount of trust from like, okay, we think Cthulhu Saves the World is funny, we'll trust you with the IP. Yeah, that's fascinating. And just to backtrack a little bit, so a lot of people perhaps don't even really know what Penny Arcade is, For my generation, most of us think of Penny Arcade as just PAX, the expo. Just like quickly, could you like talk about Penny Arcade, the phenomenon at the time that you became involved?
Yeah, you're right. Like, I've talked to people at PAX who that were there, and they're like, and I'll say like, oh yeah, and then we worked with Penny Arcade, and they'll have like a blank stare, and I'm like, Penny Arcade, we're at PAX, and they're like, okay, and I'm like, yeah, this is Penny Arcade Expo, and they're like, oh. So a lot of people, and I don't even blame them. PAX is a big deal. It's like the big video game convention. But Penny Arcade itself, it started as a web comic, and it's a comedy, and it came out I think 3 times a week, and it was just satirized the video game industry, and it would usually poke fun at certain video games or video game tropes, or make fun, poke fun at current video game trends or business practices and things like loot boxes, for example, or some CEO that made these horrendous decisions, things like that. And it's funny, and the comic strips are always accompanied by a write-up by the writer for them, Jerry Holkin. So he would always talk about the current events in the industry and what they're poking fun at, and then just a bunch of other context and things like that. But Penny Arcade grew, like it kept growing, and I think they really took off when they hired Robert Koo to develop their business, because they were getting, as far as I understand, millions of views or clicks or links per month, right? But they weren't able to monetize that in a way that they should. Like, they were making some money from ads and little projects, but Robert Koo turned it into a real business, like just getting licensing deals and figuring out, the revenue and the costs and the, profit and the return on investment, blah, 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 all the business stuff. And that allowed them to do things like PAX, which was actually started out real small. I think their first Penny Arcade Expo was like 6,000 people, I think. It was very small. And then they just kept growing it and getting more sponsors and getting more, bigger companies involved. And they worked with a whole other management team to handle that. And it became so big that a lot of people associate that as kind of its own thing. I mean, like you said, and there's people that they know about PAX. They don't really know about Penny Arcade, but it's basically, you boil it down, it's a webcomic series. It's been around since the late 90s, and it's still there. And the two guys that are the writer and the artist are still doing it. And they're involved in a lot of other things like charities and other side projects and side stories, but that's still their main thing.
Wow. Yeah, that is humongous. It's a humongous part of gaming history that a lot of people are just completely oblivious to. PAX, everybody knows about PAX, not everybody knows about this webcomic, but it was such a huge thing at the time, such a household name that, like I said, it takes a lot of trust for them to say, okay, yeah, Z-Boyd Games is now going to be making 3 and 4 in our ongoing series. So, like, yeah, what kind of creative freedom did they give you guys?
So they were super generous. Like, let me just say that up front. They basically said, like, Jerry Holkin said, I have this story, but I trust you guys to do the game. Design the game that you would design, and I'll work with you to make sure that the story, characters, plot, setting is all situated. So they basically gave us like free reign to do whatever game design, the maps, the progression of the game and stuff like that, as long as it, we could work in the plot beats. That was basically it. So they also gave us, I mean, I'm not going to go into the specifics, but a very generous offer on terms of like, how we were going to do royalties or revenue and so forth. So it's not like we were rich overnight or anything like that, but it was a very, very reasonable, very generous deal. And obviously they brought us into PAX and other places too. But creatively, yeah, they said that they really wanted us to make a game that we wanted to make that would be good. And they trusted us with that. And that's what we did. We did take some like playtesting feedback and stuff and made changes along the way. But it's like, once we had this game design going, and we talked to Jerry about it, and we also worked, I should also mention that we worked with like a producer. So a person who's a big go-between between Penny Arcade and us, which his name was Jeff Callis. He's an awesome guy. I'm still friends with him today. He made things go real smoothly, always in touch, helping us like figure out, like, when Jerry or and Robert who are busy, like what we can and should and shouldn't do and how to go about things. It made the process much easier. But basically, when we showed Jerry stuff, he would say, wow, this is great, like, keep going. Or you would ask, okay, how does this going to work? And we would either adjust it or in ways that we wanted to, or figure out how to make it work with this story. It was a very cool process. I like it's hard to imagine like how it went so smooth, but I think a big part of it was Jeff Callis working with us and them, and their willingness to just let us do our thing so that Jerry could focus on story and allow this creative process to happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wow, that is awesome. I think, maybe a lot of producers today could take notes, just allowing people to be intrinsically motivated, make the game that they want to make, and trusting that that's going to be, a good thing. Yeah, I think artists, game developers are at their best when they're just given creative power, and it's what a privilege that you guys were given. Yeah.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah. That is awesome. My goodness. So, um, you might be one of the few RPG developers that has worked on a licensed property in the indie scene. How did it differ? How did that process differ from your original works, like Cthulhu Saves the World or Breath of Death?
Yeah, I mean, so we touched on a little bit, but like with our original games, we'll usually come up with uh, sort of the concept of the game, like kind of the hook, and also sort of this main character or setting kind of at the same time. So, as an example, Cosmic Star Heroine, we knew we wanted to do a sci-fi game. And we also kind of knew we wanted it to have sort of a spy element. And one of the big gameplay mechanics that we wanted to experiment with was this style system, which is kind of like certain moves give you style points, and those enhance certain abilities and stuff. And we thought like, oh man, like a big part of the whole James Bond thing is like doing things stylishly, not just like, escaping an enemy base, but doing it with style, like explosions, stuff like that. So that's kind of how it tied in. Obviously, with Penny Arcade, there was already a story, so it was more like, okay, we want to make a game where here are the mechanics, and here's how the battle system works. But we already have this story, so how do we tie it together? And so that took a little bit, not a whole lot of back and forth with Jerry. We actually went and met with them and with Jerry and Jeff Callis at the Penny Arcade like office for a whole day, like, or maybe it was a day and a half, just blocked out schedules just to like figure out, here are the specific story beats, here's where they happen in the game. These story beats are going to take place as a dungeon, like an actual map. Here are the types of enemies and the bosses you're going to fight. And then here are where the story beats are going to take place. So we like got together and all just mapped out the whole thing all at once in like one meeting. And I guess you could say that that's kind of how we would do it if it was just us. But here we had to work with essentially third party, which is Penny Arcade, and use their story and make it, integrate with these ideas that we had. And of course, they had ideas too, like, oh, you should do XYZ and maybe that'll be cool. So we integrated some of their, Jerry's ideas too, which kind of were part of the storyline and kind of added in as we went. But yeah, and another big thing I should say is that we took more like playtesting feedback early on. For our first two games, we kind of like made the game and then put it in the community for playtesting where people would say, oh, this is fun, but what about XYZ? And then we would decide whether or not to change that one thing. With this, we were basically submitting like versions of the game as we went, and it was a little easier to get feedback early on and make changes early on. And a big part of that, again, is we were working with a producer, with Jeff Callis, who was really understanding. I think he's been a producer for different studios for a long time. And then he worked at Penny Arcade doing sales-related stuff. And I think he may have actually gone back to doing producing in 2024, but I'll have to catch up with him. So yeah, it was a lot more back and forth, a lot more taking outside input on story and plot beats, and a lot more early play testing. We actually made a big change where early on we were going to make the story, the progression of the game a lot more linear, where you went from point A to point B to point C on like an overworld map, but there were no actual dungeons in between. There would be story beats that play out, battles that occur, but then you would finish it and go to the next essentially dot on the screen. And the idea was to make it streamlined and focus on the story. But after playtesting early on, you're kind of like, people want to play as Gabe and Tycho in this story. Like, they want to play the companion arcade characters and move them around and explore the world. So we just went ahead and did the actual game dungeons, for example, like a more traditional RPG, and it was worth it. I think people liked it more that way, even though it's like more of a traditional way of doing it, but it was definitely worth doing.
Okay. So for moving it, you moved it from sort of like a point A to point B structure to a more traditional, like, okay, here's a whole dungeon structure. Like, okay, I see what you mean. Yeah, gosh, that is fascinating that you guys were sort of like, you had this established system, right? You were given all this creative freedom, and you were such a well-oiled machine that it just transitioned very nicely into a relationship with a producer and the creators of this comic. So, wow, that's fascinating. My goodness. So, you know, when it comes to the art for the Penny Arcade games or any of your other stuff like Cosmic Star, Heroine, This Way Madness Lies, and your more recent remake of Breath of Death, you have challenged yourself to create all the visual assets for several large-scale JRPGs. And that is insane. Several. Like, most people can't even say they've finished one. It's clear that each map, each animation is just like, I don't know, you put so much care into them. And like, what's that process like?
Oh man. So I guess if you're looking at overall for a game, um, let me see. It's you have everything from, you have characters and character assets like sprites, and then you have environments, and so you have maps, and there's different types: overworlds, towns, dungeons. To break it down a little bit, you have things like user interface, and you have things like effects, and then monsters, enemies, and such. And then outside of it, you also have key art, like, and you have like logos. So you have logos, which are high resolution things. You have key art, like box art, character art, things like that. So, you know, you're one person and you're making all of it, which is super rewarding. I love doing it because by the end of it, and it launches and it's out and it's a finished game, you can say like, everything you see, like, I made that and I remember making it. I remember enjoying it and changing, coming up with ideas. So the whole process, it's different for each one of those things that I mentioned, each element, but it usually starts with, you know, the game concept. And now let's come up with the look of the main character or the main cast. And that involves a lot of brainstorming and researching. So, like for an example, with This Way Madness Lies, it's our RPG that involves magical girls and stuff out of school. Well, a lot of that stuff was inspired by, you know, anime that came out in the 80s and 90s. So researching character designs involved, you know, looking at these animes and stuff for the magical versions, but the non-magical versions, like, it was a lot of fun to look up 80s and 90s fashion, like styles, and coming up with ways to integrate that into the characters and each one of their personalities. So like if you had a more of like a tomboyish character, like what was the sort of style for like that kind of look back in the early 90s? Or what about, you know, the girly girl type or the, you know, whatever. So it involves that. And then it's like, okay, how do I make this into a sprite? So I would just generally start with one character, face forward, get the horizontal and vertical axis. How many pixels do I have? Is it, you know, 8 by 8 or 16 by 16 or 16 by 32 and so forth? And then it comes down to just drawing it, taking that inspiration. Usually I had a pile of inspirational ideas and some sketches. I didn't generally draw like detailed character art, concept art, because I don't necessarily need to convey it to another artist at the time, right? Because there's only me. I have to concept art and detail it and then give it to the next person to build the asset. I'm doing it myself. So I'll build out the sprite. And a lot of times my ideas for the visuals or the character design come while I'm doing the sprite, because maybe I'll do a character and they have long hair and it doesn't look distinct compared to another long haired character. So I'll give them something to hold their hair up, like a bow, just as an example.
I like this approach a lot. this idea of like starting with the sprite rather than some like character turnaround, some big like concept art thing.
Yeah, exactly. And it's neat because it's like both are happening simultaneously. So I'll be drawing, I'll have this bundle of ideas and I'll make the sprite, and then I'll like add something to the sprite to make it more distinct or interesting. And I'll be like, and then essentially that goes back into the overall character design idea. So after I've made all these sprites, it's like, okay, now I have this complete vision of what the characters look like if I need to make box art or whatever, key art. So then it's the sprite, then it's the animation of the sprites. And then after that, it's doing the same thing for the dungeons, well, I should say the maps, so the overworld, the towns, and the dungeons. And that involves, again, a lot of research, looking at, try to come up with references.
Where do you find your references? Are you like a Pinterest person or just everywhere? Go to a museum?
I mean, yeah, like an online museum, maybe, right? So I'm not going to, like, I haven't, it's kind of difficult to go to the museums here. I'm in Houston, big city, but like to just drop things and go to a museum would be a little bit time consuming. But yeah, just going online and getting inspirations, and I'll try to think of a dungeon and or if I'm doing a dungeon, for example, I'll try to think of the opposite of what it is to get ideas. So as an example, there's an alien world in Cosmic Star Heroine, and to make it more alien, there's these characters who they're ghosts, right? But they're contained in these ghost suits, and so it's a very bizarre thing, and their world is very natural. And I don't want to just do another forest. That would look really generic, like Earth has forests. So what's the opposite of like land? And it's the deep sea, and the deep sea is almost an alien world into itself, right? So I'll make like the natural dungeons, the forest dungeons, if you want to call it that, based on a lot of reference and research into what like the weirdest stuff deep under the sea looks like. You have all these glowing creatures and these plants that almost look like creatures themselves, and fish that look like monsters. Like there's a lot of really cool stuff you can get ideas from just by thinking like, okay, what would I want to do a forest on an alien world, but I don't want it to look like a forest. What is something totally not a forest that would look alien because it's an alien species? Or what would look like, what is the opposite of that I want to see, just to get ideas? Like, what's going to make someone what's going to be more interesting than what a person would expect?
That is awesome. Your approach to making something alien was to just sort of like find the complete opposite of what you might see on land, and that's how you got those novel, amazing trees, probably.
Yeah, and just weird stuff. Like there's another part of the game, I think it's also Cosmic Star, and also, the Penny Arcade games too. I'll use that as an example. So in the Penny Arcade games, there's a part where you enter into the body of this eldritch god entity, and then it's like, this is great because now I can use like microscopic biology and stuff as inspiration. Like, yeah, I'm looking at body, but now I can do like organs and microscopic organisms and stuff for inspiration. And all that stuff is really weird when you look at it, because you don't see like body parts ever, like internal organs. You don't see, cellular structures every day. And it's very weird and alien, and it's unique and interesting. And being able to build like a dungeon where that's the inspiration is a lot of fun. So yeah, I mean, it's and that's just the idea generation part. Like that doesn't even talk about the mechanical aspect of like drawing tiles and textures and making the sprites out of it. That's a whole process. But yeah, just the idea generation is really interesting, and then turning it into pixel art game aspects is the whole second part of it.
Yeah, my goodness. Yeah, one of my favorite details of it's sort of like a similar thing from Penny Arcade 4, where you kind of like in the beginning you go through this giant skeletal pelvis. That's such a creative thing. It like changes your relationship to what might be a mundane object, right? Yeah, so also playing with scale. Yeah, that's awesome. Gosh, yeah. So just I got to drill in on this process because I'm a pixel artist too. I'm very interested. Like, do you use Aseprite? What software do you use?
Oh gosh, yeah. So I'm pretty sure every pixel artist uses their own thing. It's so funny. Like everyone has has a different tool or set of tools. For me, it's weird because I've always used PaintShop Pro. Like some people use Photoshop or AC Sprite or whatever, or even some artists use MS Paint, which is kind of funny, even though there's not a lot of animation tools and such. I use PaintShop Pro just because it's pretty flexible with pretty much everything art related. And then you can zoom in and handle things within grids and things like that. And then it integrates a little bit into and their basic animation software that was bundled with it forever ago. So for me, the advantage is if I'm drawing, for example, a monster for the battle system, which is usually a bit more larger and more detailed of a sprite, I can just literally sketch it in PaintShop Pro. I'm not necessarily like for the monster sprites, I'm not necessarily doing them pixel art at the pixel art level. I'll draw it like a sketch, and then I'll be able to ink it, give it the base colors and the shadows and highlighting, the rim lighting, and polish it a bit. And then I'll scale it down to the pixel size within PaintShop Pro. And that's where I can either clean it up or convert it, essentially convert it into pixel art using pixel art techniques to turn it from a scaled down resolution thing into something that actually looks like you can actually understand what it is on the pixel art level.
That's awesome. So it's all in the same program. You don't have to use the pixel art program and the digital painting program. How do you balance your high quality standard with just the sheer quantity of stuff?
Yeah. And you're right. Like it is a lot to do in RPG when you're doing all of the art and assets. Everything from the sprites and the portraits, the animations, the walk and run cycles, the idle stances, the map designs it's not just in brainstorming and coming up with the look of it. Now you got to design the progression through the dungeon and keep it interesting, and you integrate the battles, or you integrate if there's like a puzzle involved in the dungeon. And then how do you lay out the overworld? That's always a fun project, laying out the overworld in a way that like we know how the game is going to advance. Like this dungeon first, and this one, this one, this one, and you have one or two or three side dungeons spread out. So how do you like gate the player, like so that they don't go to dungeon 3 before dungeon 2? And how do you make it feel natural and not just like, the artist or the map designer just drew a line and you're just going straight through and it's clearly obvious to the player? How do you make it feel more natural? The easy thing to say is like, reuse what you can. If you have stuff, try to reuse it. Sounds great. Like if you're making an RPG and you're doing coder design, maybe you can reuse the general RPG engine you developed and just you're changing battles and progression and stuff. But you can't reuse a character unless it's a direct sequel. I can't use the character sprites from Cosmic Star Heroine in Cthulhu Saves Christmas. I have to start over. Like you have to start over with the character designs and then the sprites and then animating them all over again.
So there's certain things that you do have to prioritize. You just have to, you're going to have to do it the hard way every time.
Yeah, every time. And you do have to prioritize it because the character sprites are a big thing. The player's going to be looking at them the whole course of the game. So you got to nail those, and those have to be interesting and unique. So you don't even want to reuse things for those, but it's another thing you have to redo. And so you have the other big chunk of there's usually three big chunks, I guess four, but I'll focus on three of these kind of RPGs when it comes to the assets. There's the main character sprites, which everybody focuses on all the time. So those need to be good. Then you have the maps. So the towns, dungeons, overworld, those are a huge amount of work. And usually those take the longest because you're building the game world. And then you have things like the enemies and the effects. And that's like a third column maybe is either enemy monster sprites, the effects, the user interface. So it's like boom, boom, boom. These three big giant things. If you have all three of those, that's the bulk of the game assets. So with like the dungeon, the maps, that's the biggest bulk of it for the most part. At least with those, you can try to find more instances of things you can reuse, but you don't necessarily want to or necessarily can reuse them exactly as they are. So you might reuse like a tree sprite that you made in your last game in your new game, but you don't want your forest in your new game to look just like your last game. You don't want it to be cookie cutter. So if you're doing a game with a new theme, let's say for whatever reason you made a tall skinny tree in your last one, and well, in this one maybe you can put snow on it, or maybe you can alter the hue.
Right.
So really the balance becomes focusing on the stuff people see that have to be new, like character sprites, and making them interesting and unique, and then try to take what you have out of the bulk. And the more games you make, the more you have to work with. Take what you have from your old stuff, bring it into the new one, and try to change the basics that give it a new feel, like the hue. Changing something from red to blue with nothing else can make a big difference. Just work with those quick change things, and then add little details so that it looks, that gives it pushes it over that line of like looking similar to looking like something new with just a few extra details. So that's how I'd say you could save the most time. But
just reuse.
You really don't want your games to just look like cookie cutter each time. You really got to try. I try to avoid looking like, oh, this game looks just like the last, but now it's Cthulhu instead of, Alyssa from Cosmic Star, that kind of thing.
Right.
It's a hard balance, but it's always a ton of work. So.
Huh. That's fascinating. So you really do like dig into your backlog. You're not ashamed of grabbing a tree from Cosmic Star Heroine or whatever and bringing it into this new project. And yeah, I mean, gosh, I guess what it is all about is just like making a good game at all costs. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
yeah, and it's a balance. You really have to make sure you're not like reinventing wheels, but if you do try to reuse old stuff and adjust it, you want to make it feel like the game is new. You want to put in new details into an environment so that it's not just reused stuff. And
now
you're getting into like, how much time do I have to make new stuff? So
doing that with an intention, doing that as it relates to a larger map or a new setting. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's cool. For sure. That's a good tip. I know I personally, I'll be like, oh, here's a tree. I'm going to make this tree cool. And I'll zoom in and I'll be like spending hours on this tree, trying to reinvent the wheel when, maybe I do have a backlog I could draw upon, So that's good advice. Yeah. Do you remember how you got into art as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people that do art later in life got into it when they were kids. Like, you always had an interest in art. It was always, fun or interesting to you to do, just draw things or paint things or sculpt things or whatever. So I was always like that. I was always really interested in creating art as a kid. But one of the things I actually kind of regret is that later in I guess more like after high school, and I was in college and then law school after that, it sort of fell by the wayside. It felt like, there's only so much time in the day, and it was a hobby, and you only have certain time for certain hobbies. And it felt like, oh, I like making art, but I'll do it when I do it. And then it kind of just sort of stopped during those college and grad school years. What brought me back into it really, like, part of it was getting into game development again, making that freeware game I made before Zvoid, and then doing the Zvoid thing and making the art for it. But it's funny because what really got me into like learning and pushing myself on the art side again, like with a new interest in it, was doing the Penny Arcade games. And I say that because suddenly with that game, I wasn't just making my art. I had to make art that gelled with the Penny Arcade artwork. And so to make it gel, I had to start researching like, okay, how does Penny Arcade produce their art for the comics? How did they do it for the first two Rain-Slit games? And I started learning about a lot of the tips that people probably take for granted, but I didn't know at the time. And I realized, wow, if I like try these things out and see if they work, my art improves. And it's subjective, but I could feel like my art was getting better. And I would start learning about the next thing and the next thing. And then I started to look at my own art as, okay, I made this and it looks decent, but this one part, I feel like I could do better.
Mm-hmm.
And I start researching, how do I fix that one part? How do I improve on that skill and integrate it into my art? And over time, you just gradually develop your own sort of style, and things start to look better, whether it's more detail or like a different style that's more aesthetically pleasing. And I think I always tell people this. They say, how do you improve your pixel art?
Mm-hmm.
And I say, you can study pixel art techniques, but I think a big way to improve your pixel art, your art in your maps, your character art, is just improve your art in general. Just make artwork like on a pencil and paper or digitally, like, and just draw characters or environments or things that you enjoy doing. Make it fun, and then figure out how, like, try, test yourself. Be like, take yourself out of your comfort zone. Try something you're not used to and see if you can do it. And if if you don't do it well, see if you can learn why it didn't turn out well and try again. But I think the main thing is to do it keep doing it as long as it's fun and interesting, and focus on things that are interesting to you. You don't want to
Yeah.
make it a chore on top of, your other work, your other game development, or whatever if you have some other job. Don't make it a chore.
Yeah.
But I think once I started focusing on improving my art, like as a general thing, pixel art started improving, maps, character, portrait art, it all started getting just better, and it
Yeah.
looks better.
That's a really neat process of just becoming inspired by one particular thing, saying I can do better on that, and over time these things build up, and you're making, Breath of Death 7 Reanimated, and wow, that's awesome. Gosh, yeah, I definitely agree with the idea of like just get better at art, learn the formal rules, you know.
That's why some people say build the first dungeon last, because by
Mm-hmm.
the end of the game you'll be more acquainted with like the mechanics and the layouts and stuff, as well as your art. If you're doing all the art, you'll have like a grasp on the style and so forth. So if you do that first, that way people start the game and they'll be hit with your best work at the outset, instead of like your least good work of the game from the outset. So
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. That is a good philosophy. Just sort of like maybe having a plan for the beginning, but like going back at the end and giving your full like understanding of the game's visual identity to that portion.
and
Yeah.
layout and like progression, like how it moves and plays and stuff. Like if you do that, do the first dungeon or map or whatever, first level, make it a draft, and then move on to number two. And then when you finish the whole game, when you're doing these, then go back and change that draft and finish it. And then like, because you'll be like, oh, if I want it, actually, it's better if it progresses this way, or if I have a battle here and a treasure chest there versus the other way, you'll just have more insight. So
Yeah.
I like that too. I think people should do first dungeon last, or the first major dungeon last, so that they can bring that insight to it.
Gosh. Okay. Yeah, I think that's a unique part of your process. Um, yeah. So my final question for you is: do you find yourself drawing from any non-game influences when you make games?
Yeah, I think everyone does. I think it's a little bit subconscious too, because the things we like and we're interested in, especially if we're talking about visual mediums, is going to be very subjective. Things that we like, like certain color combinations and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as which I should say, my favorite color combination is like blue and purple. Blue, purple, and red. So you'll see that in
Oh
a bunch
yeah,
of my games.
yeah,
It's
for sure.
it's. I'm gonna try not to make that into too many of my games, but I do like that color combination. But as far as like external stuff that are influences, I think some of the obvious ones are just like eldritch lore. So like the easiest one is the Lovecraftian style of lore, not just the Lovecraft stories, but like there's a whole lot of stuff out there that's just like this creepy, otherworldly just vibe and style and aesthetic, and as well as like story stuff, like
Mm-hmm.
eldritch stories that are just horror mixed with mystery and horror combined. And
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing how pervasive that influence has been, Lovecraft today remains relevant, It's pretty amazing.
yeah, it's been around for over 100 years, and it's a lot of it. I don't know if all of it, but a lot of it's public domain, obviously. But yeah, it's like that whole idea of doing the strange and the horror and combining it with mystery and and like dark magic. It all kind of gels, and you would think that like, man, like that's just a very cool like sort of aesthetic and sort of setting. And you'll see it. I mean, all the Z-Boy games have that. Robert and I both like enjoy that sort of thing. Also, the whole undead like thing kind of fits in with the Eldritch theme. So you'll see a lot of stuff in our games.
Yeah, does that come from somewhere? The undead part?
Yeah, there's undead, and there's like a zombie element to all of our games, like every single one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Like Breath of Death, very obvious. Cthulhu Saves the World. It's Eldritch, but there's a whole town taken over by zombies. The Penny Arcade 3 and 4 games, again, those weren't technically ours, like from the beginning. So I don't remember specifics for that. But Cosmic Star Heron has a whole side dungeon where it's like a giant Resident Evil reference almost, where you have like a police station taken over by zombies. And then Cthulhu Saves Christmas, obviously, that's got the Eldritch thing. And then This Way Madness Lies, a big part of it is that it's Eldritch monsters that have come to life to invade the world. And there's a bunch of zombies and stuff in that one too. So,
Right.
I mean, it's throughout. I also wanted to say, like, a cool specific example that I like that both I and Robert had in the past, and it's kind of a cool influence for us and in terms of ideas and also creepy aesthetics, is Junji Ito.
Ooh, yeah, for sure. There's something really unsettling about that stuff.
Yeah, and I think like it's funny. I think a lot of people may not be like formally aware of who Junji Ito is or his works, but they could probably see a screenshot of like one of his artwork or one of his mangas, and probably like they've probably seen it before.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those things they may not have read or seen or watched or whatever from it or about it.
Just some image somewhere in the ether has like left a lasting impact to the point where almost everybody has just a brief working understanding of who he is.
Yeah, but it's like you'll kind of know, or it'll get your attention. It gets your attention. Like it's really good, creepy, like body horror stuff, eldritch stuff, horror. There's a lot of supernatural element to it, and it's just a really cool source of inspiration. In my opinion.
Wow.
So I think that's kind of a neat example.
Interesting. So Junji Ito, what's a good example of that like showing up in one of your games?
Well, I mean, it's just like it kind of pervades. It's nothing that's very. It's not like a direct, obvious. Here it is, clearly on Junji Ito. But if you look, I think a good example is some of the body horror. I try not to go overboard with body horror stuff, even though I'd like to with our games, because we don't want them to gross people out necessarily. Yeah. But a good example is the Penny Arcade games. I think it's number 4. It might be number 3. It's hard to remember. Where one of the final bosses was inspired by this, and it's like he starts out there's 3 phases, and he starts out in a cloak, and when you start defeating him, he becomes unmasked, right? And he's just this figure 8 shaped horror thing with teeth and this creepy like disfigured body. It's that kind of thing, and some of the monster designs in that game were, inspired by some of this. But again, it's the idea of like creepy, contorted, like weird, like unsettling,
sort of almost stuff. Geometric,
Yeah.
Yeah, gosh, that one spiral image where it like concaves into that lady's face, so impactful, and it reminds me of the figure 8 idea, definitely. I would have never thought that, beneath, all this like, classic JRPG stuff, there's like a real like you're inspired by Resident Evil and Junji Ito and all the horror stuff as well.
Yeah. I will say, just as a random point of or just kind of a random reference, there's a game on Steam. Okay, so in the past, Robert and I have talked about doing like a game with Junji Ito style art, like black and white and body horror and like weird geometric shapes and stuff. Oh,
you're talking about World of Horror.
Yeah, I was going to mention there is a game like that. They just went flat out. And it's called World of Horror. So you've heard of it. It's neat. It's worth checking out. It's not something I'll probably ever do. Like to be that on point, but I do think it's very cool if someone went that route specifically.
Yeah, for sure. Wow, that's fascinating. That's fascinating. This is totally my wheelhouse. I love horror stuff. So, yeah, I appreciate this conversational direction. Yeah, World of Horror was great. I hope to see more horror stuff from you in the future. Definitely. Okay, so that brings us to the fan questions. Everything is Data on Blue Sky asks, a lot of old RPGs have mechanics that are very of their time. And I'd be very interested to hear how an indie dev approaches QOL updates when doing a remake of something that has old bones.
Yeah, so QOL, so quality of life updates. So, we talked about it earlier. When someone's doing a remake or a remaster, they're faced with this question of balance. How much do I stick to the classic formula of whatever this game is, or the original formula, because people loved it for a reason?
Mm-hmm.
And how much do I change for either a modern audience, or what is considered streamlining it versus taking out stuff that people liked? And that debate extends to like movies, books, music, every form of media. If you have a classic, doesn't it really need to be changed? And if so, what are you going to do? So my opinion falls kind of in line with some of the remakes, Shadow of the Colossus remake, stuff like that, where the idea is to keep the core gameplay and story the same. So keep the overall experience essentially the same, because the people liked it for a reason. As long as there's no like major flaws or big problems with it. But then once you've got the core gameplay and the things people like, such as the story and characters, the idea is to try and bring everything else up to today's standard. In my case, it's like my own personal ability standard of the art and presentation and what I can do with code. And it's also a matter of finding the pain points. Okay, so you've taken this classic, the original gameplay, and you've brought it into your game engine. You've programmed it or reverse engineered it or brought over code or however you did it. So it plays like the original, and people are like, okay, cool, yeah, it's good. It plays like the original. This is great, and the story's the same. Characters are great. Now it looks good. Okay, you've done all the art updates and things like that. So what else can you change that's not going to take away from what made it good? That's the challenge. For me, it was, I think the easiest thing to do first was to make it control better. Not to say the first one controlled poorly, but it was 4 directional movements, so up, down, left, right, and it was one tile at a time, and it felt very restrictive, but of course it matched the aesthetic of the 8-bit Dragon Quest looking style it went for. Pulling it up to this modernized, this sleeker 16-bit style meant, okay, we're doing an 8-way run. Like, we're not going to be stuck one tile at a time going up, down, left, and right. We're going to have multi-directional movement, and it's going to feel better that way. And I think it just literally feels better. When you have something that looks more detailed and more complex, you expect it to move around the world more smoothly. So that was an obvious one. Sometimes you'll inflict a poison effect onto an enemy. In the original, the only way to know that an enemy was poisoned was that after the end of the round, the pop-up box would tell you enemy loses X HP to poison. So it's a pretty obvious addition to add like a floating green bubble above an enemy when they're poisoned, just as an example, or an icon below your character's stats to show that they have a buff. So things like that. I added a few other fun things, and I think that don't take away, but I think the goal is, how do I keep the classic formula, keep the stuff that's fun that people liked, but just smooth things over, make it more streamlined, but don't go overboard. Because if you're going to go overboard with the changes, that's when you're crossing into either starting a whole new game or doing what, Resident Evil 2 or Final Fantasy Remake did. And you're just like saying, all right, we're scrapping everything. We're going with the new game design. We're keeping the vibes and the aesthetic and the story and nothing else. Like, that's kind of, you have to make that decision.
Mm-hmm. My goodness. Yeah, I can see what you're saying. My goodness, you definitely struck a good balance between sort of like increasing the fidelity graphically and streamlining the user interface, as well as sort of keeping the the visual identity and the mechanical identity. So, yeah, I like that. All right. Next question. Succubella Games on Twitter asks, I'd like to hear about what the future holds for indie games. So, how much work goes into them, and what's the payoff?
Oh, okay. So, wow. Yeah. I mean, the fun thing, if you want to call it that, about the video game industry, especially for small studios, is that it's constantly evolving. And so, what someone's advice was 5 years ago or 10 years ago might not really apply today. So, that's crazy because it's just constantly changing. Markets are changing. Um, Competition and like in terms of like what games are out and how many are out at a given time is constantly changing. Platforms that are popular might lose favor. Platforms that were nothing may gain favor, and it's like you have to constantly adapt. So, as far as indie developers, you have to really like for the future. You just have to keep in mind, okay, I've gotten this far, and XYZ has worked for me, but you have to keep in mind an open mind that you might have to change how you're doing things because the market is constantly changing. Platforms are changing. What does and doesn't work changes. Competition in terms of like other people, other games popping up is constantly changing. So I think the most flexible developers that can sort of adapt will stick around and do continuously new things. And the ones that don't, like, I hope they figure out how to like keep a core audience so they can stick around. There's a few of those. They'll keep doing the same thing because they have a core audience that will keep them supported long enough to keep doing it.
Right. Okay.
I will say, as far as the future, I always thought, and maybe this is coming true a little bit, that you have so many developers coming out now, and there's so many ways to get into the industry now that, like, there's a lot of people coming in. A lot of the platforms are getting crowded with releases. How do you stand out? And that's hard for a lot of studios, even ones with experience. And I've always thought that there would be this rise of like indie publishers. So like you're not necessarily fully independent if you have a publisher, right? But if you're an independent studio, you may end up seeking a publisher who's not a AAA publisher, not Square Enix, Capcom, and so forth, but a smaller publisher that can help you get on other platforms, maybe help with marketing or connections, or help you finish your game. And I thought that there would be more of a rise of that, and I think we're starting to see it. Not even the big ones like Devolver; they're huge, relatively speaking, but smaller publishers that their goal is to help indies reach new places.
Yeah, that's what Electric Airship's all about. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's exactly what I'm talking about. Like, I think that's going to be a really good thing, but it's not going to erase studios that do want to just do everything on their own. I think it's great that there's going to be this option for small studios. And if you're willing to adapt, that's another avenue for you that you might want to take. And so I think that's why it's cool that Electric Airship is doing what they're doing. To answer the rest of the question, what goes into these and what's the payoff? It really depends on the developer. Some developers I know do it for fun. So they're not even looking, it's not even their main job. They're doing it for fun. The payoff is, I made a game. That's amazing. People try to make games all the time. It's really hard. Like, unless you're making a simple game like tic-tac-toe or a dice rolling game where you try to guess the number, it's really hard. It's a combination of so many different disciplines. Just game design and programming and artwork and animation and music and sound effects and making it all gel is just crazy. So just getting it to work is motivation. Releasing one is a lot for what goes into them. So the payoff might just be finishing and releasing one. The other payoff for a lot of studios, it's selling enough copies to make it to the next one. Like, you want to do this for a living, you have to be able to sell copies, and selling copies to pay the bills and keep doing the next one. And that's the goal. And the successful ones, I'm glad that they can keep doing it. Sometimes the financial payoff is very low and they struggle. And sometimes you'll see the oddball, like random, not random, but like you'll see a game come out of nowhere and just blow up the charts, just sell millions. And everyone wants to be that guy, like, so to speak. Like, have a game they put their heart into and it just blows up the charts and does amazing. That's not something you can bank on. You want to hope for the best, but you got to plan for the worst. And I also want to say that like something that's changing for the indie scene is we're going to start seeing a lot more, especially for RPGs that we're involved in. I think there's going to be a lot more games with bigger scope. So I think the easiest example to pull from is Sea of Stars. So a lot of indies talk about them because, you know, the pixel art RPG, it's in this sort of market we're in. And there's a whole debate about whether that's even truly indie. Like they had this massive Kickstarter, they've had funding from 1 or 2 different publishers. Like in addition, they're technically an independent company, independent studio that's not owned by someone else, but they probably had, you know, exponentially more resources at hand in a studio that's maybe 20 people, not including contractors working on their game. And their game is amazing. Like, debatable whether you think it's fun to play or not. It's an amazing product. Like, from a technical standpoint, artistic standpoint, and just a sheer scope standpoint, it's amazing. I think we're going to start seeing a lot more of those in our little genre because that game right there is a case in point about how these can be built on that scale and sell huge numbers. So we're going to start seeing more of those. And the guys that are smaller and the guys that are in between, like, you know, like us, we'll keep going. We'll keep, you know, figuring out ways to adapt. But I will not be surprised if there are more big projects like Sea of Stars, you know, as we go.
Yeah, these big projects, tons of money, really just hammering in on we are a classic JRPG, you know, sort of thing, you know? And like, I think those guys, I can definitely see that. That's profitable. You know, there's going to be more of those coming up.
Yeah, there will be. It shows that there's at least this size of market. You know, like it's not just this market. It's not just the market. They've shown clearly there's this size of a market for this kind of game. And so I expect there to be a few more like games that come out that are like that. I don't know if they'll sell as well or not, you know, or what they'll be, but I expect that to start happening now that there's this obvious precedent.
That's a great point. Wow, thank you for that insight. So, finally, you have a new release as of this recording, and it's cliche, but I gotta ask anyways. Do you have any new projects you're thinking of working on, or are you just gonna take it easy after this one?
Well, for one, the game came out just a few days ago. So, I mean, I'm, you know, addressing a few bugs that were found. Nothing like too major. Following up on people that are doing, you know, stories on it or reviews and so forth. And I'm going to have to start digging into adding, releasing the game on other platforms, other PC platforms, as well as researching how to handle console ports. It's all a big to-do list stuff. So, like other PC platforms, consoles, researching how that's going to work, how I'm going to make that happen. That's the big thing on the to-do list. But I already have a bunch of ideas for games I want to do next. I mean, I don't think that's unusual for developers, honestly.
For sure.
I can tell you that I've been doing turn-based RPGs for over 10 years. So my next one is probably going to be more action-oriented.
Wow, big transition.
Yeah, but I also want to do more of the a little bit more of the horror side of the stuff we were talking about. I want to dig into that more. A lot of the games I've done in the past, there's horror elements, but they're mostly lighthearted. I think I want to do something that's like straight up kind of scary. Not like revolting, right? But like wow, a little bit, you know, spookier, a little bit darker.
Yeah. Horror adjacent, you know, maybe we're like psych horror or something like that. Yeah. I dig that.
All just ideas, but you know, I have my priorities right now, which are other platforms, consoles. That's number one. Number two, I'll keep these ideas are going to keep bouncing around my head until I get to the point where I actually start. So
my goodness, that's such a promising creative area right now. There's so much cool stuff happening in the horror JRPG genre, and yeah, I mean, to hear that somebody with your pedigree is going to be breaking into that is really awesome. Yeah,
it'll be fun.
Yeah,
some really weird stuff.
Yeah, for sure. anything you want to plug? Could be your stuff. Anybody else?
I mean, I just launched my game. That's been like, it's been my brain has been stuffed to capacity with like stuff that needs doing, has been done, stuff ongoing about my game's launch since it's so recent. So that's literally like all my brain's been focusing on. So that's what I would say is check out my new game, the remake of Breath of Death 7. It's on Steam right now, hopefully other platforms soon. I mean, my new studio, it's just started for this. It's going to be me going forward. It's called Shadow Layer Games. And yeah, I mean, easiest way to see what I'm doing is on Blue Sky. I'm Bill Creates, and my studio is Shadow Layer Games there, so that'll be easy to find. And hopefully I'll get a moment in the next week or two to play a video game for fun and relax. And
Oh my goodness.
take on my own development. So we'll see.
Yeah. Oh, that'll be good. Yeah, I hope you find a good, relaxing game that you can dig into. Maybe it'll inspire you in your future projects. Well, thanks so much.
I want to mention a couple of other people that were a big help. Product Soundworks did the music for the Breath of Death remake. They did Cosmic Star Heroine. They're super awesome. It was fun working with them. I also worked with a person that did the trailers, including the two main trailers, which were also the launch trailers and the social media versions of them. His name is Mike, and he runs a little company called Attract Mode. So if you're a small studio, want to check them out for like trailer purposes. He's very chill, very fun, easy to work with. Mm-hmm. And then, I also want to say like outreach to the media and stuff. It was tough, but I worked with two guys, Dan and Derek. They worked for a little company called PR Hound, and they were also awesome to work with. Made it like a much smoother process. So beyond that, it's like too many people to name, just colleagues and friends, people supporting, and like, yeah, it's been a crazy year, crazy past couple of years. It's been awesome. It's been fun. And it's kind of mind blowing. I'm finally here. Game is out. And now I'm working on ideas for the next one. So we'll see what the future holds.
Yeah, totally. Well, I guess it wasn't just you. You got a trailer person, you had the soundtrack person, some PR people, and so it all sort of plays into the release. Congratulations. And what a huge accomplishment. Yeah, looking forward to seeing what you make next. And thanks so much for coming on to the Electric Airship podcast. My name is Decent Treatment. This has been Bill Sternberg, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day.